Hello, beautiful people. My name is Maya. You might also know me from TikTok as I'm Roll With It. And today I am really excited to be here because I originally tried to film one video that was like a year-long summary, and it was a little bit too much. My brain is a little bit too fried for that. So for today, because I'm frustrated now, we're going to go over the top 5 things that ablets do that annoy me as a disabled person. Ablets meaning non-disabled people. People who are problematic. I wanted to start off with the one that pisses me off the most, but honestly, looking at my list, I don't know which one to pick. Like, I'm thinking back to core memories for each time those things happened to me, and I'm just like, okay, the thing that's sitting with me the most is there is this one day when I planned a photo shoot by the Cape Cod Canal with one of my besties. This was back when I was still a manual wheelchair user. I could still transfer my chair independently in and out of my car. I could still walk short distances without a mobility aid. So I was entirely independent at this point in time. So I showed up early and I was feeling cute. I had this gorgeous yellow dress on and I was taking a couple pictures of myself. And this older person and their spouse walked past me and I hear someone say, "Oh, hello." And I'm like, that couldn't have been me, but no, it was for me. So my first thought is, oh, okay, it's one of my mom's teacher friends. My mom is an elementary school teacher. A lot of her teacher friends are in the area and they tend to talk in the really light, sweet, cutesy voice because they're working with children, and sometimes they talk to me like that because they all see me like a child because they knew me when I was a child. So I say hi back to this person and I'm like, okay, I don't know you, and it quickly becomes clear that you don't know me. And they're like, "It must be so nice to get out, isn't it? Especially on a day like today, it must be so nice for you to be outside." And I was just like, yeah, it's nice, like trying to shut down that conversation as quick as possible. And the thing that bothered me the most, cherry on top, as they were walking away, he freaking patted her on the back like that was the one good deed for the day. Like, oh, good for you, you talked to a disabled person and infantilized them. So that is infantilization. When people talk to disabled people like we're children, treat us like we're children when we're full-grown adults, that is infantilization. And unfortunately, this happens super frequently. Along with that, people will also just act like I can't talk for myself. People will just assume that I am incapable of thought, that I am incapable of speech, and they will only talk to whoever it is that I am with when I'm with someone, or they just treat me really, really weird when I'm alone. So when you see disabled people in public, talk to us like you would any other person, treat us like adults. If we do need to communicate differently, like we have experience being disabled and existing as we do. So if we need to communicate differently, we will do that and we will let you know. Or if we need somebody else to assist us in communication, that person who is there to assist us will let you know. That being said, emergencies do happen, so please be open to assisting individuals during those times of need. Tying into that with the whole idea of treating any disabled person like you would any other person, because that's all we are at the end of the day. Disabled people are people. We just have different needs, support needs. Anyways, that also goes for general interaction. I've frequently gone out in public where I'm at a restaurant or checking out from a store and I have my own credit card, I have my own money, and I will go to pay, like I will be reaching with my card, and they just keep looking at whoever I'm with instead. Like they're expecting somebody else to pay for me, or like they can't imagine that I would pay for myself. That is really, really frustrating. Tying into the idea of infantilization, talking about me and treating me like I am a car. People love to say things like, "Nice go-kart," or "Whoa, slow down there, speed racer. Don't you know there's a speed limit?" No, there is no speed limit. Do you have a speed limit? Is there someone over there saying that you can't run or that you can't jog at that speed, that you need to go 2.3 miles per hour instead of 2.4? Like, that's not a thing for abled. So please don't do that for disabled people who are just using our mobility aids and navigating the world like anybody else would. Another really common thing is, do you have a license for that thing? And that one also irks me for the exact same reasons. You don't have a license to walk. You don't have a license to run. I don't need a license to use my mobility aid that enables me to move like anybody else. Our mobility aids are just that, tools to aid in mobility. So we're not cars. That is where the key frustrations come for me, is how people don't view disabled people and our mobility aids as humans like they would for other people. They see us as entirely different things. Like, to feel comfortable telling another adult person how to move. Like, there is a massive disconnect there. On the topic of mobility device etiquette, people assume all the time that they can just touch me or even move me. Back when I was in my manual chair, if I didn't have my brakes on, people would just move my chair. And this would happen in public settings like at restaurants, but also in medical settings, like nurses and doctors would think that it was okay for them to just start pushing my wheelchair without my permission. Like, what? It's so inappropriate for so many reasons, because for starters, it's rude to just move somebody, to just think that it's okay for you to move an entire being, like somebody else's being. No, inappropriate. But also on top of that, it's really, really dangerous. If someone isn't ready for you to move them, they could easily get injured. The issues with moving mobility aids doesn't just stop when the person is actively using a mobility aid. There were times when I would be sitting somewhere with my forearm crutches in a certain spot, and people would think that it was okay to just grab my forearm crutches and move them. That is private stuff. Like, you wouldn't just grab somebody's purse and move it. You wouldn't just grab somebody's phone and move it. These mobility aids oftentimes cost more than your phone. So when you touch somebody's mobility aid, that's like touching their phone, but like more costly. So just don't. It is super rude and super disrespectful to touch people's mobility aids, to touch people in general, to touch other people's things in general. So like, that applies for mobility aids and disabled people. It is super rude and impolite to touch us and our things without explicit permission. And it's also dangerous, so don't. Please just don't. Another thing that ties into the physical aspect of disability, like, don't touch our mobility aids. Also, don't touch us. People will frequently bump into me and my wheelchair and they won't even react. They act like it doesn't even matter. Normally when you bump into someone, it's like, oh, sorry, excuse me. People like turn around, pause, and say something. But with my wheelchair, people bump into me and like shake my entire chair, and they look at me and then they just keep walking, like they don't even care that it happened. Like, they treat bumping into me like you would treat bumping into a wall, like an inanimate object. I am not an inanimate object. And I honestly, like, when I first came back to my university, people would walk into me all the time at the dining halls. And I reached a point where I was putting a sticky note on the back of my chair that said, "Don't bump me, it hurts." And people would walk into me so frequently, even with that sticky note, where I reached a point where I would turn around and I'd be like, hey, I am a human being. I am a person. That is not okay. Like, I had to remind people that I am more than just an inanimate object. Our mobility aids are extensions of ourselves. If you bump into one of them when we're not sitting in it or directly touching it, of course we won't feel that. But if you walk into somebody's walker, into our wheelchair, we feel those vibrations. Well, if we have feeling, it depends on the person, but like, it is just very, very rude, and even if the person can't feel it, you still shouldn't be walking into them in their mobility aid. So, in summary, do not touch disabled people or our mobility aids without our permission. Not only is it rude and disrespectful, it can lead to legitimate harm. On the topic of harm, oh my goodness, don't help without permission. There are so many times where people would want to help me or assist me in some way, but would actually end up doing something that made my life a lot more difficult or even resulted in injury. Back when I was a manual wheelchair user and when I had a lot more strength, I could still independently open doors and get in and out of spaces without assistance. But I had a system where I relied on the door to adjust my weight and push myself through the door. How would I do it, hon? Okay, so when I pushed this wheel to keep myself from turning, I would push against the door to enable myself to go straight through the doorway. And people would frequently try to grab the door out of my hand when I'm holding onto it and relying on it to be steady and also to keep my wheelchair straight. And so if you just yank it from me, that would pull on my joints, which was super, super painful, and would also cause me to tip over. And just that happened. There were a few moments where I almost fell out of my chair and where the door would come back and like slam on top of me. So people had good intentions, but the way that they wanted to assist me wasn't actually what I needed, and ended up putting me in further risk. And this can go for any other circumstance where you're helping a disabled person. So if you want to help somebody who is disabled or anybody in general, it's best to get consent and ensure that you're doing something that that person actually wants you to be doing. Like, if you see someone struggling to get their wheelchair into the back of the car, don't assume that they want you to pick it up and do it for them, because you might break their wheelchair putting it in, or you might be helping in a way that they just don't need. So it doesn't hurt to ask. But when a disabled person is out in public and trying to do something, We generally can do it, we generally know how to do it, or we know to reach out and ask for help. I don't say this to deter you from ever helping a disabled person. It's just understand the fact that we are adults, that we are unique individuals capable of thought, and generally have a solid understanding of our needs. Finally, I think this is a good point to end on. I'm glad that it went this way because this was a bit unorganized and a bit chaotic, but the final point is, don't ask what my disability is. I know I just said it's good to ask questions, but not about the disability. The only time you would ever need to know what somebody's disability is if you're their doctor. Like, even if you're a family member or their best friend, unless you're actively involved in giving care and ensuring that that person is okay, you don't need to know their diagnosis. And like, even then, you still might not need to know their diagnosis. The only things that you need to know when it comes to disabled people and disability is, what are your support needs and what can I do to accommodate you to ensure that your support needs are being met? Even then, you might not need to know the support needs. That disabled person might have already figured it out all on their own and might not need any assistance from you whatsoever to get their support needs met. And that's totally fine. Great, good for them. That being said, when there are times and individuals who do need support, the only thing that matters is what support is needed and what you personally can do to ensure that their support needs are met. That has nothing to do with the actual diagnosis of the disability itself. So don't ask those questions. To further elaborate on why you shouldn't ask disabled people what their disability is, not only is it information that you don't need to know, it can also be a really sensitive and difficult topic for people. They might have medical trauma that they associate very strongly with their diagnosis or their process of getting their disability, of becoming disabled and getting their diagnosis. That might have been traumatizing. People like to ask, like, what's your disability? A very common question that goes along with it is, what happened? You might be asking somebody to relive the most traumatic event of their life for your own curiosity. Like, I wish people would think about that a little bit more. Like, when you're asking disabled people about their disability, about their mobility aids, about their history with their disability, you are asking for private, possibly sensitive medical information that could be very heavily tied into traumatic experiences in their life. So ask yourself, why are you asking these questions? What is it that you're actually trying to understand? Like, if you want to know what someone's condition is, that way you can better understand their experiences and what they're going through, that's fantastic. I've seen other creators talk about how when they share a diagnosis, if their friend then goes and researches that diagnosis, that's a great way to show your support for that friend. That way you could then have a better idea of what their symptoms are like and what they're going through without them having to do the emotional labor themselves. So you don't need to know what somebody's diagnosis is, but if they do want to share a diagnosis with you, and this is someone who you care about and someone that you want to support, I strongly recommend researching that diagnosis and learning the most that you can about it to be the most supportive that you can be while removing the emotional labor from your disabled friend. Those are my top 5 least favorite things that ablets like to say or do regarding my disability. Hopefully you guys have learned something, and hopefully this helps prevent future unpleasant situations happening for disabled people. But I also want to end on a positive note. It did feel good to rant, it did feel good to vent and just let those things off my chest. But let's end it with a positive. Number 1 perk of being a disabled person. All eyes are on me anyways because people just haven't gotten used to disability. And so if I know that people are going to be staring at me regardless, it gives me so much more freedom to do whatever the heck I feel like doing. Like, I'm gonna be as strange and exuberant and colorful as I feel like. I'm gonna be dancing in public and just doing whatever my heart desires because people are going to be staring at me anyways. They can stare at sad me in a wheelchair, which does happen sometimes, or they can stare at me having the time of my life. And if you want to judge, I'm sorry that that is how you're choosing to spend your energy and your time, but I'm going to be having a good time, so see you. That is it for today. Thank you guys for watching this video all the way through. I do appreciate you. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you want to see more content, maybe subscribe. I would appreciate it. But that is it for today, and I do appreciate you all being here. Don't forget to hydrate or dihydrate, and do some form of self-care because you deserve it.